Well, nice to see everybody here. I'm Ann Larson. I'm the director of the library. There's Taylor. She's the assistant director. Nice seeing such a big crowd here today. We haven't had big crowds for a little while due to something a few years ago. Anyway, that shall not be named. So, wanted to thank you for coming. We're going to listen to Colin Tingo on his adventures along the Appalachian Trail. So, and I've known him, well, since he was in high school, and then followed him, and I'm like, when he went on the trail hike, and I'm like, oh my God, we have to get him here in the library. So without further ado, wanted one more mention. We are recording it, so be careful what you guys say. But it'll be out on our YouTube channel next week. So you can review it or send people there and see it. Pardon? No, not all. We did a lot during COVID, and I just haven't done anything since then. That was kind of whatever. We might start doing that up again, though.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you. Come on, Colin.
Well, hello, folks.
Hi.
Let's see. Well, my name is Colin Tingo. It's nice to see some familiar faces here and a bunch of faces that are unfamiliar too. So thank you very much for coming. So I hiked the Appalachian Trail last year, and this talk is going to be about my journey through the trail. So it's going to be kind of one part storytelling, one part logistics on how to undertake a hike like this, one part demonstration. I did bring all of my gear with me, just like I would have packed it for the trail. So kind of towards the end, we can dissect that a little bit. I can show y'all, exactly the kind of stuff that somebody brings on a trip like this. And certainly we'll leave time for questions and answers. I do want to interject at the start here, though, and say that if you do have any questions as I'm going along, please feel free to stop what I'm saying, raise your hand, and ask. I'd rather if we get any questions that you do have, right when you get them, so that you don't get to the end and think, what did I forget to ask? So, feel free to stop me at any point. But yeah, let's get into it. So, firstly, I'm going to ask just so I can kind of get a sense of where we're all at. So, who here is familiar, by a show of hands, with what the Appalachian Trail is? Okay, pretty much a good majority of the room. So, just at a very basic level, this is the Appalachian Trail. A brief overview. The Appalachian Trail runs from northern Georgia to central Maine. So it is one of the United States' longest continuous hiking trails. It is the oldest national scenic trail in the country. It was proposed in 1921, completed in 1937, so it's been around a while. It's certainly one of the best known long hiking trails that the U.S. has to offer. Among others, there's trails out west. The Pacific Crest Trail is another crown jewel of U.S. hiking trails. The Appalachian Trail certainly has a special community about it. So it starts in Springer Mountain, Georgia, finishes in Mount Katahdin, Maine. Like I said, about 2,200 miles. That exact length varies year to year based off of certain trail reroutes, trail maintenance work, what it might have going on, but generally around there. To give you an idea of the verticality of the Appalachian Trail, running from the entire length of the trail is like ascending and descending 89 vertical miles, which is a lot. I can tell you that it's a difficult trail. It's a long undertaking. The Appalachian Trail typically takes most people 4 to 6 months to complete, or somewhere around there. For me, it took 6 months. I left for the Appalachian Trail, or started out at Springer Mountain on April 10th of last year. This time frame right now of year, the springtime, is kind of the through hiking season, really. A lot of people begin their hikes down south this time of year in the spring and start heading north, trying to more or less chase chase the spring in a way as they go farther north and get to the end of the trail before winter hits.
Good plan.
Yeah, very good plan. So what is a through hike? A through hike specifically is undertaking one of these long trails in one go, trying to do the entirety of the trail. So, for the Appalachian Trail, that's the entire 2,200 mile length within one calendar year. So the definitions that some people give that can vary a little bit. What is a calendar year? If I started on April 10th, does that mean I have all the way till April 10th of the following year to finish? Is it all within, finish before December 31st? It varies. But ultimately, doesn't really matter. A lot of people ascribe a ton of importance to what the real definition of a through hike is. Are you a real through hiker if you don't finish by December 31st? Me personally, I say who cares. If you hiked all the miles, you hiked all the miles. That's accomplishment enough. Just some terminology here that I may use here as we continue the presentation. When you hike the trail, the way I did it, I hiked it northbound. So I hiked from Georgia to Maine. It's considered a no-bow hike for short. Most people, when they undertake a through hike of the Appalachian Trail, will hike it northbound. I'd say probably about 80% of hikers will undertake or attempt to undertake the trail in that direction. In part because, I think in part it's because of tradition. So much of the trail, people have just done it that way for so long that everybody's used to it. All the infrastructure is set up that way. There are so many hiker supports in the south in comparison to the north. A lot of gear outfitters right near the trail. A lot of shuttle services to and from the trail that are ready to service the hikers when they come to Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee in that March, April time frame. So it's kind of just the traditional start location. It's also easier down south. A great reason to start the trail in the northbound direction is that as you go farther north, and as I'll highlight in some of my slides here as we go through this presentation, the terrain gets significantly harder once you hit states like Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. The mountains get a little bit more rugged. There's much less population up in that area, and it's just a lot more remote. So the learning curve as you undertake a through hike tends to be such that logistically it's easier in the south, physically it's easier in the south, and it gets harder as you progress north. And so that's another great reason why a lot of people undertake it that direction. But that doesn't mean that you can't hike the trail southbound. Southbound hikers will often start the trail as soon as they can, as soon as the winter allows them to up north, which is usually mid-June or so. The snow melts enough that they open up hiking up in the northern parts of the trail. So you can also do it as a flip-flop hike. That's where you just start somewhere in the middle, head a direction, somehow make it back to there, and then hike the other direction. So there's really any number of ways you can undertake a through hike, but those are the most common ones. And then you've got all sorts of other things that fall into, certainly not lesser categories, but section hikers are folks that endeavor to hike the entirety of the trail section by section. I met a number of people out on trail that were hiking 200 miles this year. They would come back and do 200 miles or so every single year until eventually they digest the whole thing. Not everybody is as crazy as us individuals that say, "Now let's just do the whole thing, get it done with." But roughly there are, and these are estimates based off of kind of voluntarily given information, but the Appalachian Trail Conservancy estimates that about 4,000 people attempt a through hike every year. The completion rate for through hikes is about 20%. We'll go over many of the reasons that people might give up on their through hike, but there are a lot of them, and like I said, it's a pretty big endeavor to tackle the entire trail. It's not totally surprising that the completion rate is so low. Flip down here. So anywho, these are just pictures from the very start and the very end of the trail, just to prove to y'all that yes, I was there in both spots. So that's my end to end. This picture up top actually is technically not the start of the trail. It's before the start of the trail. The Appalachian Trail begins at Springer Mountain, Georgia. This is Amicalola Falls. There's like a 9-mile approach trail before you actually hit Springer Mountain. Most people will start at Amicalola though, because there's a great visitors center right there where you can register your hike with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. You get a thru hiker hang tag for your bag. I don't actually have mine on my bag anymore, but you register as like, I am thru hiker 2,182 of the 2024 northbound season. So most people will choose to start at Amicalola, do that 9-mile approach trail, and then finally start their hike. One of the questions that I get asked a lot, oh, did you have a question?
The two pictures you had before, who took those pictures for you?
Who took those pictures? The first picture, I believe that would have been my mom that took it. So my mom and my aunt dropped me off in Georgia. Very nice of them. We road tripped over. They kicked me off and said, have fun in the woods. This last picture on top of Mount Katahdin was taken by my friend Alan, one of 3 other people that were crazy enough to go and endeavor Katahdin in the winter. And I'll explain why later on that, but yeah, my friend Alan took that second one. One of the questions I get asked a lot by people when I talk about going on a hike like this is, like, did you go alone? And the answer is yes, I did go alone. I started my hike solo, but the Appalachian Trail is so full of people. Like I said, you got about 4,000 other people that are looking to complete this hike in any given year. And a lot of you are all headed the same direction at the same kind of pace, and so you meet a lot of different people along the way. So I just put some little pictures here to illustrate, you're not really alone on the Appalachian Trail unless you really want to be. You meet people in towns, everybody's looking to go and get food when you go into town. Really the best part of going into any town, actual food. But you got people at shelters. We'll go over what shelters are like on the Appalachian Trail. So really just an experience that you can make as social or as solo as you want. I kind of did a mix of both. I hiked a lot of the trail by myself. Well, in fact, I rarely hiked actually with other people, but I would meet the same sorts of people at the end of the day, time and time again. So I hiked solo a lot, but spent a lot of time with people at the end of the day, which for me was a good balance. One of the things that you'll often hear on trail is the phrase "hike your own hike," which just says do your own thing. Have the trail as you want to have it. So let's see. So a little bit about some trail culture, I suppose. So the Appalachian Trail starts in the south, and when all of these people flock to the south to start their trail experience, there's this whole community of individuals that will follow in support of hikers, especially down south when so many people begin the trail. So we call this trail magic. These are just some examples of trail magic that I took pictures of. So trail magic is really just when kind folks that like to support hikers will donate their time or money or just kindness to do something for hikers. Like this picture here in the top right, somebody had set up their truck and a flat iron grill to cook eggs and breakfast for hikers coming out of the woods. An awesome thing to see when you're emerging from the woods in the middle of some cold morning, having just hiked 8 miles or so. Even just a garbage can that somebody comes and takes trash from, where you can dump out stuff that you've been carrying for days in your pack. This sign up here in the top left was from the Cookie Lady. There are 2 Cookie Ladies on the Appalachian Trail. One in the south, one in the north. This lady that just has cookies for every hiker that passes through. This blizzard I'm holding here with my feet up, I had hitchhiked into a town, and which is, I should say, a primary mode of transportation for hikers. The Appalachian Trail crosses a lot of roads, goes through some towns, but only close by others. So you'll oftentimes have to stick out your thumb and hitch a ride into town. And this particular occasion, the person that picked me up they wanted to drive me through the Dairy Queen drive-thru, get me a blizzard, and then see me off on my way. Super kind. And it really does, I found it very inspiring that so many people were just out there being kind and asking nothing in return. A big part of one of the lessons I learned while I was out on this hike is that I think, on the whole, people are pretty good. People are pretty nice. It's hard to see that and remember it sometimes. A lot of things are inflammatory in this world. People are always at one another's throats. But when I was out on the trail, I saw so much kindness with really asking nothing in return, and I found it very, very inspiring. So that's part of trail culture in a way. Let's see. Another thing to note about the Appalachian Trail that's kind of unique to it, as far as a lot of the hiking trails in the U.S. at least go, is that it has shelters. I get asked a lot of the time, where do you stay? Do you camp every night when you're on the trail? The answer is you camp most nights, and there are these shelters along the way. So shelters are really just usually these 3-sided huts, open-faced, just mainly a roof and a couple walls over your head, but are super handy. Some people don't like to camp in shelters for a number of reasons, but I would say I camped in shelters maybe about 50% of the time. Number one, they are a time saver. You don't have to pitch your tent or take it down in the morning. Nothing gets wet, which is great. You don't have to worry about packing up a wet tent in the morning, which is always frustrating. But they also tended to be just epicenters of social activity. A lot of people would plan their daily hikes around, what shelter might they be aiming for that day. Talk amongst their friends in the morning, say, we're going to hike 20 miles today to Woody Gap Shelter. End up there at the end of the day. Shelters provide not only a nice roof, they also typically have a privy, which was fantastic. For those people that don't want to poop in the woods all the time, privies were excellent. But yeah, and usually they're situated by a water source. And shelters kind of vary in quality. Some of them were real ramshackle places. Some of them were very nice, like if you're familiar with Fontana Dam, near the Fontana Dam there's a shelter down there that people call the Fontana Hilton, because it's situated at a park near the dam that has a public shower and outlets, trail luxuries that you don't generally have. So, but this is the typical gist of what they do look like. Usually kind of like that. Some of them multi-leveled. Always infested with mice, by the way.
Yeah.
Mice love these shelters. They know that people stay there, and they know that people leave food there. So that's one downside, why some people would choose not to stay in a shelter. I can tell you from personal experience, another great reason not to stay in a shelter is people that snore. I kept a small, a journal of my trail experiences, and in the back of my journal, I would write down the name of everybody that I met on trail, whether they were hiker or not. And somebody asked me one time, why do some people have these little stars next to their name? And those were people that I met that snored so badly that I would make a note of that and decide I'm gonna camp a mile down the trail. So one guy, oh yeah.
Can I find out what was your trail name?
Good question. My trail name was Alpine.
Uh-huh.
So Another part of AT and hiking culture is that people get a trail name while they're on trail. Most people go by their trail name almost exclusively on trail. Mine was Alpine, and generally you earn it in some way, shape, or form by something happening on trail, or somebody gives you a trail name. Some people pick their own, but mine I actually got because somebody at Neal's Gap, right down the first 60 miles or so in Georgia, they commented on the way that I was using my trekking poles, and they said it reminded them of an alpine skier. I don't believe he knew what he was talking about. In truth, I think he was just a guy that was really high in the woods, but was really jazzed to give someone a trail name. So he gave me my trail name, and it just stuck. So Alpine is my trail name. Another example of a good trail name, and tying into this snoring thing, the very first shelter I stayed in, Stover Creek Shelter in Georgia, I met a guy named Freight Train, and he got that trail name because he snored so ferociously. That's what they called him. So, yeah.
So when you say you may just choose to set up a tent, can you do that anywhere along the trail? Or are there certain...
There are certain spots that you can't. Those are more exceptions to the rule. Generally, dispersed camping is allowed anywhere along the Appalachian Trail corridor. There are spots where they make it evident that you can't camp. Some of it passes through private property. Some of it passes through national parks that have camping restrictions, like Great Smoky Mountains and Shenandoah National Park. So there are certain spots that you can't, but mostly anywhere's game. Another question?
Bear instead of mice. I worry more about bear where I live.
Yeah, bears are a problem, especially down south. There's a lot of infrastructure around shelters for bear, to prevent interactions with bears. They offer most of the time a bear box that you can put your food into, which is just a big metal box that everybody puts their stuff into, closes at the end of the night. Bear cables that you can hoist your food up onto. Or it's recommended that you hang your food, with your own, own rope setup. So, but yeah, bears, especially in the south, when so many people start and so many inexperienced people, can be a problem.
Was there a lot of competition to get in the shelters when you arrive there? I mean, like, it's just first come, first serve, right?
It is
And
first
then
come, first
do
serve.
they make room for you, or are they protective of their space in there?
It's there's usually enough space.
Yeah.
If it's a rainy day, obviously there are going to be more people that are wanting to stay in the shelter. Let's see, I think on this previous slide,
Like, how many people can you cram in there?
depends on the shelter. Usually most shelters could accommodate probably max 8 people, and you'd be sardining it at that point. You'd be getting real cozy with people. This picture that in the top right there was actually, I think, my 3rd day on trail. It was a rainy day. Doesn't look like it there, but it certainly was rainy earlier and rained a lot later on. I was taking a picture from the upper level of that shelter, looking down at everybody drying out all their stuff. That was a situation where I think we had maybe 14 people in that double-decker shelter, and they had to make space for me. So yeah, but it is first come, first serve. Generally, they're not full, though. Yeah?
I see, is this your leg?
Yes, that's my leg.
I see some red spots on it. So I wanted to ask you about flies.
Flies were never a super big nuisance for me on the trail. I mean, you'd get bitten occasionally. I don't think the folks over on the East Coast really know what bugs are. I think our education in insect activity is a little bit more preparatory for something like this. The worst bugs that I encountered on trail were up in Vermont. I just hit the season a little bit right for a little bit, but they really weren't bad the majority of the trail. So, but they're inescapable. Plus, some of those might not even be bites. They might just be irritation for not having showered for a week, honestly. But yeah, good question.
How did you recharge your equipment?
I would recharge my electronics every time I went into town. I had a battery bank that I carried with me. Specifically, I started the trail with a 20,000 milliamp hour battery bank. At one point that got destroyed by rain, and I had to buy the only battery bank in this little town in Connecticut, which was a 50,000 milliamp hour monster. Like charge your phone 10 times over kind of territory. But I would carry that battery bank, which would generally be enough to get me to the next place I could charge it in town. Yeah, good question. All right, so this is just a picture I threw up here to illustrate kind of what typical campsite might look like. This was right at the border of Georgia and North Carolina, near Tennessee. So the Appalachian Trail runs along the border of Tennessee and North Carolina for quite a ways, where you don't even know what state you're in most of the time. But this is the tent that I started the trail with. In later pictures, you'll see that I have a different tent. This one ended up breaking on me. But that happens. You put your stuff through a lot of abuse. Question?
Are you going to talk about what preparations you did before you left?
I don't think I specifically have it on a slide here, but before I left, I tried to do as much walking with a weighted pack as I could. I would throw jugs of water in my backpack and walk into and out of town, as like a means to go to and from work, just to get some miles in and just kind of try and get used to carrying weight on my back. In addition, I personally do a lot of running. I can tell you that simply running is not great prep work for the trail. I learned real quick that you can run a marathon and be used to having done that, but it's way different than walking up and down mountains with weight on your back. I would say I didn't gain what they call your trail legs until maybe 400 to 500 miles into the trail.
Wow.
So,
What's your pack weigh?
my pack at various times weighed anywhere from 15 to 25 pounds, so kind of in that range. Yeah, question?
How many calories would you burn a day, you think?
Depends on the day, but a lot. 6, 7, 8,000 calories. So, yeah.
Did you lose a lot of weight then, like by the end of it? I mean, were you?
I didn't lose a ton of weight. I definitely lost a little bit, but not so much that it was shocking or anything. I made a pretty concerted effort to try and eat as much as I could, because I didn't have a ton of weight to lose when I started the trail. So I was constantly fighting, like keep it on somehow. So, yeah, a lot of eating.
How many mileage were you averaging each day then?
I think if you look over the whole 6-month time frame, it roughly breaks down to maybe about 15 miles per day. Some of those were much higher mileage days. Some days you'd take a 0 day, no mileage done, or a Nero, not much. Near zero, more hiker slang and terminology, but the average is about to roughly 15 miles a day.
So you were probably doing 20, 25 other days.
Yeah, nope. And the single biggest day I did on trail, and I think I've got a slide on it, was part of the 4-state challenge going from Virginia to Pennsylvania. That day I did 54 miles.
Wow.
My biggest single day. But plenty of 20-mile days. We typically thought, if you were hitting 20, that was a pretty good day. Terrain dependent, but yeah. So typical camping setup. This is another camping setup a little bit farther along in the trail, up in Maine. Different tent, but same kind of deal. You just kind of find these little open spaces along the trail. Usually pretty evident that somebody else has camped there. You try to leave as little impact, leave no trace as you possibly can. So
I see fire rings. So is wood available?
no, really, at any of these dispersed campsites, like this one had a fire ring down south. You can have fires. A lot of people would, just for the sheer entertainment of it. It's hiker TV, people would call it. But
So where do you get the wood?
you would have to gather any dead and down wood that was around the area. So.
Yeah, good that many people on
Oh,
the
I
trail.
know. Yeah, in the south it was hard.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was entertaining from time to time to build a fire. But Usually by the end of the day, we were so tired that you don't even bother, to be honest, though.
And are you filtering water in that one picture?
Yeah, that is my chosen means of dealing with water. So you can choose to filter your water on trail. That's what I would do. I had a water bladder that I would collect dirty water in. Does this have a laser to it?
Yeah. There you go.
Now we're rocking. So, this is my dirty water bladder. It was like a 2-liter water. I'd scoop water out of the river. This black thing in the middle is my water filter. I had screwed that to the one and let it just gravity drain or squeezed it into my water bottle. So, you can also choose to treat your water with bleach. Some people would just use straight up bleach. There are UV, SteriPens, any number of means to filter or treat your water. I would bet you 90% of people used that kind of filter. That's a Sawyer squeeze filter, if any of you are familiar with those. Very good, very effective. You can filter way more water through a Sawyer squeeze than you for years worth of water. So, I used one the entire trail, so. Let's see. Navigation on the AT, pretty easy. Most hikers would use this one particular app called Far Out, formerly known as Gut Hooks, if anybody had ever used that. This is kind of what the interface of it looks like, but most people would use this. This app calls out all of the different features along the trail, like water sources, spots of interest, camping locations, shelters, distances to next towns. So it's very convenient. Most people would use it. And additionally to like an overall map view, you could see what the elevation profile for certain sections were, zoom in on parts, see what, say, the grade was going to be. Like this section had a grade of 521.4 feet per mile. My rule of thumb was that if it was below 300 feet per mile, you never even noticed it. But once you got to like 500 or above or kind of thereabout, you'd kind of notice you were doing an uphill. Some people also carried paper and compass. I think it's probably best practice in some circumstances, but to be fair, I think the Appalachian Trail is so well traveled and so well marked that I didn't even bother, and most people also didn't bother. But yeah, very well marked and traveled trail. It's blazed everywhere through the entire length of the trail. There are 165,000 white blazes, which is how you can look around and know you're on the Appalachian Trail by seeing these white blazes painted on trees, rocks. In the alpine zones, you'd see white blazes on cairns. So really, if you're getting lost on the AT, you really got to try to get lost. But not to say that it doesn't happen, but it's a very well maintained trail. So a lot of people ask about wildlife on the trail. What sorts of things do you see? Even though I don't have a picture of one on here, I saw 29 bears on the trail. None of them were a problem to me. I know of plenty of people that had problem encounters with bears, losing their food bags to them, for example. Snakes were common. This is a rattlesnake that I encountered in Tennessee. They were, timber rattlesnake. They were nice because they'd let you know they were there. So I'm thankful for them. Although he stuck around in the trail for quite a long while. But other things you'd see, these are ponies that they live in the Grayson Highlands area of Virginia. They're wild ponies. You saw them all over the place. It was kind of cool. But all the typical wildlife that you might expect to see. And you see a lot of the same sort of stuff around here. This was a porcupine that kept me up all through the night when I was camped just past Duncannon in Pennsylvania. It kept trying to eat the guy lines on my tent. So I'd wake up and it'd be, this far away from my face, and you're wondering to yourself, like, what do you do in that circumstance? Because you can't swat off a porcupine. So, kind of a tenuous situation. But yeah, kept that coming back time and time again to try and eat my tent. A very frustrating night. This is a big pile of moose poop from up when I was passing through Vermont. I had one very memorable experience with a moose having woken me up. I could hear it stomping around outside my tent at night. Finally shone my light out to see what's going on, and it was about 10 feet away. When it saw me shine my light on it, dropped its big moose head down, came right up to the side of my tent. Big bull moose, middle of moose rut, autumn time up north. And at that point, you just like, well, moose, I guess you're going to do what you're going to do. Luckily, he got spooked, turned and ran, but in so turning to run away from me, he caught the guy line of my tent and ripped it right out of the ground. My tent collapsed on me as he plowed off through the woods. So definitely one of the more memorable experiences with wildlife on trail.
What? No picture?
No picture. Surprisingly, that was not at the forefront of my mind at the time.
What kind of a first aid kit did you pack then, like for any, like let's say you did get bit by the rattler, or, I mean, did you have like...
I didn't have anything if I got bit by a rattler. My first aid kit was pretty basic. Basically consisted of, I had some antiseptic wipes, some basic bandages, Leukotape, which is, if you've never heard of it, excellent for blisters, if you tape over your blisters with this stuff. I carried a needle and thread, in case I needed to do any emergency sewing. I had a basic, I called it my pharmacy, which was just a pill bottle full of assorted pills that one might need. So real basic kind of thrown together med kit. More times than not, I relied on, most of the time you do have service, cell phone service while you're on the Appalachian Trail. It's pretty rare when you don't. Plus, more often than not, you're near other people, so if something really bad did happen, you're pretty likely to encounter somebody that could help you out in those circumstances. But I did carry a pretty basic med kit, so. But yeah, wildlife, all through the trail. It was pretty neat to see all the different kinds of wildlife that the different areas of the country had to offer. A lot of people ask how much it costs to endeavor a thru hike. This is a graph that I lifted from the Trek, which is a really great online platform for hikers. They do a survey every year to poll through hikers from the previous year and get some data like this. How much did you spend on your thru hike? For me, it cost roughly $12,000 for my entire hike, which includes all gear purchases, travel, food, lodging, all of that thrown into there. You can see here that the average is kind of hanging around this $7,500 to $10,500. So, but yeah, your biggest costs definitely are gear before you even leave for your hike. In some cases, gear repair or replacement while you're on trail. I had to get an entirely new tent while I was on trail. But yeah, and also costs from home, something that a lot of people fail to really compute into their cost of a hike. Still got to pay for insurance or rent, a mortgage, depending on your situation. You've got all these costs the world doesn't stop spinning just because you're in the woods. So.
How many pairs of boots did you go through?
I think I've got a slide on that somewhere. But I went through 4 total pairs of shoes. Shoes just like these ones. I still wear the same kinds of shoes that I wore on trail. But yeah, they varied pretty wildly depending on what the terrain of the trail was, but I went through 4, which is pretty common for folks on the trail.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Did you have a job that you took leave from, or were you like between jobs? How did you work that out with your employment? If you don't mind me asking?
Yeah, no problem. For me, I left my job.
Oh.
I I actually went back to the same job when I came back, but I told them at the time, like, I'm going to leave, I'm going to go do this hike, whether you approve of it or not. Which I think, and people have different circumstances that they're leaving and coming back to, but I personally really liked the freedom of not being nailed down by the expectation of going back to a job. I do know some people that were on trail that ended up constantly getting pestered by questions from their workplace or some impending deadline of we gave you this month or this much leave for this hike, and I know one guy that got off trail without finishing because he had to go back to his job. So I liked the freedom that came with not being tied to a job. So that's what I did, but there are options. So, but yeah, this is roughly what people may expect to spend on a through hike. Biggest risks for your hike not going successfully. Like we said, 20% of people will not, or 20% of people will make it through, 80% won't. And in large part, a lot of people will attribute it to injury or illness that they end up getting off trail. Overuse injuries, super common, especially down south. People just kind of jump into the hike trying to do 20 miles a day only to find that they cannot. But, more catastrophic things like you slip, trip, you break a bone or an ankle, that's obviously no good. I know at least one person that got Lyme disease that got off trail because of that. Norovirus, pretty prevalent in the South. You get all these people together not being the most hygienic. Runs rampant in Georgia and those first, North Carolina, Tennessee. The ATC warns hikers pretty often, do your best to keep cleanly, wash hands, because norovirus is not a fun or pleasant thing to experience in the middle of the woods. So, but, really, injury and illness would be what a lot of people would attribute a failed through hike to. But also personal circumstances, if you have an emergency back home. Sometimes it's just not what people expected. I think that people oftentimes go into a hike thinking it's going to be this grand, big experience, only to find that it's walking in the woods, and that's not what they really want to do. So I know a lot of folks that got off trail just because it wasn't what they dreamed it up to be. Running out of money, another big thing. Especially when things get more expensive in New England, I can tell you that. So it hits people pretty hard up there. Running out of time for deadlines back home, but also the weather window in Katahdin. They'll typically close Katahdin somewhere around October 15th, and that's kind of what people always have in mind as they're approaching the end. But also just mental fatigue. The Appalachian Trail is 90% a mental game. Getting up, doing the same sort of thing you did yesterday, time and time again, knowing that there's so much more of it to come. It's a big mental struggle, so people will tap out because of that.
Wait till you're retired.
A little bit about my gear. If we've got time later on, we can kind of go through some of these specifically, but this is a rough breakdown of what my gear consisted of. So people break down their weights in different ways. Into worn weight, what you actually wear on yourself. People don't typically count, but they'll count everything they put in their bag minus food and water as their base weight. So that's typically what hikers will compare to. Usually try to one-up one another. Oh, my base weight is 6 pounds. Good for you. But mine was 12.2, which is on the lower end, but I had enough stuff where I was comfortable. Typically when you get down to the really low base weights, that's when people are foregoing a sleeping pad or they're just using a tarp instead of a tent. So 12.2 was fine for me. But a good rule of thumb on the trail is to aim for under 20 pounds. The more you carry on your back, the more energy you're burning through every day, the more stress you're putting on your body. So to whittle that down as much as you can, is a good idea. And as far as total, fractions of what everything, constituted, my wearables were, 6.1 of my poundage, everything I typically wore. The big four are your pack, tent, sleeping bag, and sleeping pad. Those will constitute a lot of your weight. Electronics, a lot of that is just the battery bank that you carry to keep everything charged. But I carried a set of wireless headphones that I'd listen to music or podcasts on occasion. Your phone, your charge cords, your wall block, your miscellaneous stuff. Whatever luxury items you might want to carry. I carried a journal for part of the time. For part of the time, I carried a little deck of cards. Part of the time, I carried a cork ball to roll my feet on when I was having some feet problems. So anything goes into that category. Cooking and water, that'd be like your stove, your pot, your water filter, your water bladder, anything there. And then obviously toiletries and first aid.
How about food?
Food, most people don't count it in there, just because it's not part of your base weight because it's a consumable. So most people won't count their food or their water. Typically, my food carry would be about on the order of, food and water might add an additional 5 pounds or so, depending on the stretch. There might be longer stretches where you don't expect to hit a town, and you might carry more weight in food there to get you through the gap. But good rule of thumb is food carry is going to be about 5 pounds. Yep.
Were you doing primarily dehydrated meals, or did you, pretty much all the time? Did you have any fresh?
No, I didn't use too many dehydrated meals.
Okay.
They're pricey. Your Mountain House meals, your Peak refuels, all those different kinds of prepackaged backpacking meals get pretty expensive pretty quick. Some $15 per meal, $20 per meal.
Wow.
It gets pricey. So thru hikers get pretty inventive when it comes to food. Lot of ramen noodles I did, but your ramen noodles, you might throw some tuna into that. You might put some peanut butter into that and make a little bit of pad thai kind of action. So yeah, I did a lot of ramen noodles, tuna. Towards the end of the trail, I discovered that taking kielbasa or other sorts of vacuum sealed meats, you could throw that in your pack. Those don't need to be refrigerated, even though the bag says so. But those make for trying to shore up your protein needs. In the South, I carried protein powder a lot of the time to supplement things. When I was not sick of oatmeal, I would mix protein powder into my oatmeal. And towards the end of the trail, I started caring less about what I was carrying because I was just better at carrying it. And so I would throw a lot more fruits and vegetables into my pack because I wanted to eat them. So I leaned more towards better foods in the north because I was just sick of constant rice and ramen noodles. But it's a very good question. A lot of peanut butter too. Peanut butter M&Ms, by the way, have the highest protein content per, pound for pound of any M&M. So,
I agree.
and they're delicious.
They are.
These are just some important considerations when you're picking your big four. There's a lot of research you can pour into your gear before you leave for the trail. I won't go into the details of all of these right now. If anybody's got any particular questions, we can kind of go through them later. But the world of gear is vast. I can tell you that I got incredibly sick of talking about gear with other hikers at the start of the trail. That's what everyone wanted to compare notes. What kind of tent you got? What's your sleeping pad? What's your base weight? I was like, just get me out of here. Anybody that wanted to exclusively talk about gear, I'd be like, well, I'm hiking on. But there is, it's time well spent to research your gear wisely and know what you're packing along with you. So, and to be honest, no matter how much research you might put into it before you leave, things are going to change as you go through your hike too, as you really learn what works well for you personally. But these are just some important considerations, especially for your big four. Yeah, a lot of options. These are just some, we would call people Graham weenies on trail when they were super, super weight conscious. That they would care not only about the ounces on their pack, but the grams on their pack. So common things that people would do to the extreme to shave weight. Cutting the handle off your toothbrush, hey, that's weight savings right there. And you can even remove some of those bristles. Who needs all of the bristles on your toothbrush? Cooking your meals with empty cans of cat food. Saw plenty of people with those ultralight stove setups. Use some white fuel in an old can of cat food. That's a stove right there. Olive oil is the most calorie dense of any food you can find. Ultralight backpackers know that for sure. We'll add olive oil to anything. I added a lot of olive oil to ramen noodles. So, cutting off every unnecessary strap from your pack. Weighing out toilet paper and deciding that you're going to forego it because it's too heavy. I never got that extreme with it. I was a big fan of toilet paper. But, boy, people in the woods will look at all sorts of things and think, that's good enough for me. Pine cones are a good example. I knew one guy that would use pine cones all the time. And, not carrying water because water's heavy. A lot of people, myself included from time to time, would camel up at a water source. You can carry it in your stomach. Then that's not the weight you're carrying, sort of. And throwing away pocket change before leaving town, that was a funny one. We're like, these pennies do me no good in my pack. They're like garbage now. But just to emphasize, everybody's thinking a lot about weight out there. Shoes, like I said, shoes are a very important piece of gear. I use the same kind of shoes for my whole hike, Hoka Speed Goats specifically. Some of them lasted a lot longer than others, I can tell you that. My first pair was a champion of the trail. For whatever reason, my second pair was kind of a dud. But most people on trail will use trail runners rather than boots, just for the sake of they're lighter. And they dry a lot faster. You do the occasional water crossing on trail, and trail runners they're pretty good. So dry very quickly, lightweight. If you want more ankle support though, you see the occasional person that would also don their hiking boots instead.
Where did you buy the shoes along the way? I mean, there's a lot of shoe stores?
No, not necessarily. Up in, when I got to Cheshire, Massachusetts, for example, I mailed myself shoes to the Cheshire post office. Let's see, the Front Royal is a big enough place. They did have a gear outfitter that I went and bought shoes from. And my last set of shoes I also shipped to myself. So combination of buying them and shipping them. All right, I've got the next portion of my presentation will kind of just run through roughly what you could expect in each state, what I saw in each state. So Georgia has 78 miles of trail. In large part, it feels like freshman year of college in a way, in that nobody really knows what they're doing. Everybody's there for the first time and is getting used to everything. A lot of stupid decisions are being made, but it's kind of got that vibe to it. There's tons of trail magic down in the south, especially in Georgia. It's like every road crossing you'd get to, you'd expect somebody to be there in their truck with handing out goodies to hikers. If you're there at the right time of day, I often wasn't. And nobody is fit for the trail yet in Georgia. You'll oftentimes ask through hikers, what's the most difficult state or group of states on the trail, and a lot of them will say Georgia. Georgia's not a hard state, but it feels hard because you are not used to it yet. So I certainly wasn't within 78 miles. I distinctly remember hurting a lot when I crossed the border from Georgia into North Carolina. A lot of limping was done that day. This picture here, that's not what I meant to do. Hold on. Let me find where I was. We'll get there. There we go. This picture here is Neal's Gap, very famous very famous along the AT for being where a lot of people will give up. You can't see it very well in this picture, but this tree is full of shoes. People will throw their hiking shoes into this tree as a sign of they have given up on the trail. This is, I think it's about 60-ish miles into the trail. It's really the first thing you hit on trail. So it's the first place that people can hit the bailout button. But yeah, this is Blood Mountain Shelter on the AT, the highest point on the AT in Georgia. And this is the plaque at Springer Mountain. So, I said most people start at Amicalola. There's this little plaque here where the actual trail starts, and that's where everybody sets off on their 2,200 miles. This was my day 0 on the approach trail. I called it mile -5 in this picture because I hadn't hit Springer Mountain yet. But I started on this dreary, rainy day, and it continued to rain the next 2 days on trail. I didn't see a sunny day until after I was through Neal's Gap, really, after the first 60 miles. And it rained hard. Enough that a lot of people chose not to even start the trail in that little stretch of days, but I was getting dropped off, so I was going to get what I got.
Yeah, so that's what I was gonna ask, how many bad, weather days did you have, and do you just push through? Do some people just hunker down?
Yeah, I don't know that I encountered too many hideous bad weather days. I mean, you'd get them from time to time. There were only a small handful of times where I was in bad rainy weather and I was hiking no matter what. I had a schedule I was trying to stick to, and I just hiked through the rain, through the worst of it. You can anticipate the bad days and try to situate yourself to do a 0 day or a Nero day at a shelter or in a town if you're so properly placed. So if you knew the weather was going to be real foul, you'd try to align it to be a break day if you could, but it didn't always work out. So, especially not in this first stretch.
Did your rain gear work the way you hoped it would, or?
No, in fact, it didn't. I don't know. I had a long journey with rain gear. I started the trail with rain pants and a rain jacket and an umbrella. And the umbrella I got rid of because it kept snagging trees. The rain pants, next to useless. I never reincorporated rain pants back into my setup. The only thing I ended up keeping with me the whole trail was my raincoat. My legs were going to get wet with the rain pants anyways. With the umbrella, being kind of hit or miss, I figured I'm not going to waste the weight. I ended up shipping my umbrella back and my rain pants back in Tennessee, just because I was done carrying them without having been using them, really.
Did you have the zips under your arms then for the rain jacket?
Yep, my rain jacket has pit zips to it for ventilation. So rain gear is it's hard because if you put it on, you're almost going to be wet no matter what. You're either going to sweat within your rain gear or you're going to get wet from the rain. Actually, in the middle of the trail, when it would rain, like in Virginia, I would oftentimes just not put on any rain gear at all. I would just get rained on, it's a free shower, and go on with the rest of my day, knowing that I'll kind of dry off, hopefully later. Virginia is pretty humid, so that wasn't always the case. But yeah, rain gear was a kind of touchy thing. Ended up with just the jacket most of the time. Yeah.
But you had a raincoat on your pack?
I did, yeah, I carried a raincoat. Or do you mean a pack cover? No, I did not. My pack is made with an Ultra 200 composite fabric that is itself pretty darn waterproof. I also keep a trash compactor bag in my pack that I pack everything that I really don't want to get wet into before I close everything up. So that's my best defense against water. Yeah?
did you wear a lot of kind of more technical clothes, or were you wearing like,
Yes.
some basic polyester nylons?
Yeah, I wore more technical clothes, you know, stuff you might wear working out or whatnot, you know, polyesters and this whole outfit that I've got on right now, I carried with me on trail. This is a wool sweater. I carried it with me when I was up north. This is a shirt I got at the Blue Ridge Marathon in Roanoke, Virginia. I wore this the whole dang trail. Wool socks the whole way. I didn't carry anything like cotton. Cotton's a bad idea. But yeah, wool and synthetic fibers really are what I wore. Yeah, very good question. The trail runs along the border of North Carolina and Tennessee for 389 miles. Very beautiful section of trail. At this point, people kind of are getting used to, you know, the idea of hiking long distance trail. You know, you're many hundreds of miles into it. Some highlights of the North Carolina, Tennessee area. NOC is a pretty cool area situated on the Nantahala River. There's a cool there's a rafting camp more or less situated there. When I was passing through, they were having a music festival. There was all sorts of fun to be had at NOC. Hot Springs, North Carolina is a great little trail town along the way. The trail, it's the first town that the trail passes directly through, so you get to walk right through downtown Hot Springs. Hot Springs is one of the towns that got really damaged by rain and hurricane this year. After I'd passed through it, you know, by the time these southern towns really got whacked by this hideous weather, I was already up past New York. What I've heard from people that I know that still live down there or are involved in the trail in any way down in the south is that the trail towns, while they still have a lot to go in terms of recovery, are, you know, open for hiker business more or less. You know, so through hikers for this year can hike the trail. Might look a little bit different in those southern sections this year, but you know, they're able to do it at the very least. The North Carolina, Tennessee area also has the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I think that by the time that I got there, I had already seen so much of that kind of scenery that I thought, you know, what's so special about this place? But it is a pretty cool place. You know, a lot of cool vistas of the kind of mountains you think of when you think of the, you know, southern Appalachians, these blue ridge type mountains. And the Roan Highlands, these were a pretty cool section that just had a lot of big open balds and good views. This here is Fontana Dam. I mentioned that earlier. Kind of a cool little spot right before the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Yeah. This is just a kind of a slice of life picture of what you might expect on trail. I take breaks usually a few times a day, put my feet up. I think putting your feet up is a great thing to do during a break because, you know, you're putting those things through a lot of abuse through the day. But yeah, always cool spots to take a break. Virginia is a lot of the trail. There are 532 miles of trail in Virginia, making it about a quarter of the entire length of the trail, which is why it gets the nickname that you get the Virginia Blues going through Virginia. You just spend so much time with hiking through Virginia without hitting another state line. Sometimes this is where people's excitement for the trail can kind of start to wane. But Virginia has a lot to offer in terms of just sheer diversity on trail. It's spanning this much mileage. It's bound to, right? It's got the Grayson Highlands, which is where we've seen those ponies from that earlier picture. But also the Virginia Triple Crown near Roanoke, Virginia, has some great hiking areas, and also has Shenandoah National Park. About a 100-mile stretch of the trail in northern Virginia runs through Shenandoah. So a lot of cool highlights in Virginia. A lot of these red Fs on rainy days. We would count how many of these we would see on trail. I'd see, upwards of 100 walking in the day. They're kind of cool little creatures. More ponies at Grayson Highlands. I like these areas because the Appalachian Trail is often called the Green Tunnel because so much of it you are just walking through the woods. Little areas like this were always neat to me because you got to bust out of the forest and get into these areas where you actually got to see for a ways. The Roan Highlands and the Grayson Highlands were great examples of that in the southern part of the trail before you hit the real sweeping vistas up north. Some cool pictures of Virginia sunrises. There were always good opportunities to position yourself for neat looking sunrises. I like this one in particular because there's this whole, down below the cloud line here, there's an entire town that we could see the night before all lit up, but when we woke up this morning, you know, the whole thing was full of clouds. It was really just kind of a cool thing, cool experience. These are some pictures from Shenandoah National Park. Oftentimes Shenandoah is nicknamed the red carpet of the AT. There's a lot of, you know, obviously it's a national park, so there's a lot of things that are tooled for people that are not hiking through it, but rather driving through it. So a lot of waysides that you can stop and get food at, which was great. You didn't have to carry much food through Shenandoah. A lot of people that brought too much food to their picnics and were more than happy to shed a little bit of their food for the starving people that came out of the woods. So a slice of that watermelon came right from that family having a picnic. And also, I was passing through during blackberry season. Tons of blackberries. I would pick pots and pots full of blackberries and eat them through the day. So that was pretty nice. This is just one of those waysides. You know, a lot of the Shenandoah National Park runs along the Skyline Drive, I think it is at that point. And so Skyline Drive passes by all these waysides. There are portions of the trail where you'll walk along, kind of along Skyline Drive. You wonder, like, why am I walking up here where it's hard to walk rather than down on that road? But nice experience Shenandoah was. These are just some more pictures from Virginia. I took a picture of this privy at the Priest Mountain Shelter because, my opinion, best privy on the whole AT. So nicely maintained. Some of these shelters got real fancy. Like this one had a solar shower, which was kind of nice. This little rock formation they called the Guillotine. This is a ruffed grouse that I was camping with one day. Weirdly domesticated grouse at that campsite. Did not mind the people. This is the longest footbridge on the Appalachian Trail, just before Glasgow, Virginia. One of the AT kind of bucket list things that people will do is jump off that bridge into the river as they're passing through, which was great because at that point in my trip, it is July and it is hot every day in Virginia in July where we were hiking, upwards of 100+ degrees. So, you know, very welcome, you know, when you have a body of water that you can dip into.
There were no signs there that said no jumping from bridge?
There were signs that said no jumping from bridge, but there were no authorities there to prevent us from doing so.
Yeah.
This is a shelter in Shenandoah, one of the sketchiest shelters that I stayed at. So sketchy, because I could tell it was infested with rats and mice, and so I decided to set up my sleeping setup on the picnic table rather than in the shelter. That's my friend, trail named Rocket, braving the mouse-infested shelter. One of my headphones actually got eaten by a rat in this very shelter. Kept us up all night as it chewed that headphone up in the rafters. Infuriating. That's why I have two differently colored earbuds. So, this is my obligatory McAfee knob picture, like the most photographed spot on the AT. It's at the Virginia Triple Crown area. Virginia's Triple Crown consists of McAfee Knob, Dragon's Tooth, and Tinker Cliffs, which are just very picturesque places to go hiking. Like if ever you have a little bit of spare time and are wondering where could I go hiking in Virginia, I would recommend the area around Roanoke that consists of the Virginia Triple Crown. So always have to get a nice magazine hot photo. And I was there on a beautiful day.
Did you do a lot of reading about the trail and did that enhance it, or did it take away some of the sense of discovery?
I did a lot of research and reading on the trail. I wondered that to myself, like maybe I should have done less, just for the sake of, a little bit more mystery or surprise when I went into the trail. But so I went in knowing a lot about the trail. I did plenty of reading. Bill Bryson's book, A Walk in the Woods, is the book that most people think about, but if you start digging, there are dozens and dozens of books that people have written about their own experiences on the trail, and I dug into a lot of them. So, leaving Virginia, finally, you get to West Virginia for 4 miles. The trail passes through West Virginia's little panhandle here, so you don't spend much time there. The only time you do spend there is in Harper's Ferry, pretty much, which is a cool historic town that I wish I would have spent more time in. But West Virginia is in the midst of the 4-state challenge. Oftentimes hikers will try to hike from Virginia to Pennsylvania all within the same 24 hours. And I met up with a group of friends just before getting to this section that we decided, yeah, we're going to do that. So we kind of zipped through Harper's Ferry without stopping and seeing too much of it.
So you didn't sign the book at the...
I did.
Okay.
Actually, we did go and sign the book at the ATC. The Appalachian Trail Conservancy has a couple little headquarters along the trail. Obviously at the start, they've got one in Damascus, Virginia at about mile 480. This one here at Harper's Ferry. One up in Monson, Maine. So this is one where hikers will go get a Polaroid picture of them taken for the ATC's records and sign the book there to say, like, yeah, I made it this far. Going further. So this became my longest one day on trail at 53.7 miles hiked. So yeah, blipped through West Virginia. And blipped through Maryland in that same day. A lot of my view in Maryland was this, just because I night hiked it for the most part. When I left Harper's Ferry, it was kind of mid-afternoon, and so I had a bit of time being able to see, but eventually it all became dark.
And did you do that because you were behind schedule, or?
No, we just did it for the challenge of it. We, I don't know, wanted to see if we could, and we
like
did.
a headlamp or a...
Yep, I carried a rechargeable headlamp with me, so. But
Maryland, Pennsylvania.
the border is the Mason-Dixon line, so I actually got there far before any of my friends. They were way behind me. I tend to be a very fast hiker, and I'll usually get where we're going before anybody else. So I actually got to the Mason-Dixon line at maybe 3 in the morning, and then just hung around. There's a cool park there, Penmar Park, and I hung around until opening hours of a coffee shop, went and got coffee, hung out, and then went back to the line and waited for my friends. So
Is that also where they ripped up the rails and trails? Where a railroad had gone through at one time?
There's a railroad right at the Mason-Dixon line. It's still an active railroad, though. There were parts of that segment that must have been old rails trails. They were in pretty straight, pretty flat. So, yeah, parts of it probably were. So, Maryland I can't speak too much of since I really just blazed through it, but these were the folks that I did the 4-state challenge with. I would hike, I had previously hiked with some of these folks and then continued to hike with them a little bit more through the rest of the hike, but this is Calorie Man, High Five, Minion, myself, and Hotfoot, and Lucy, can't forget Lucy. So, yeah, we took the next day off after having hiked all that distance. We were all pretty dead by the end of it. Pennsylvania is oftentimes known as Roxylvania by AT hikers. This state is full of little rocks, like ankle breakers. It's so frustrating to hike through because Pennsylvania is mostly flat. You know, the elevation profile is not extreme, but you hike so slowly because of all of the rocks. It's frustrating when you get to these days of 300-foot grade and you're still going as slowly as you were back in the harder stuff in Virginia. But you push through. A lot of it reminded me of Wisconsin. Like you go through the Cumberland Valley in Pennsylvania and you're going through cornfields and, you know, and hay fields and whatnot. This picture here is from Pine Creek Furnace, where thru hikers will endeavor the half-gallon challenge. You try to eat a half-gallon of ice cream at the halfway point of the trail. I had no problem eating the half-gallon of ice cream. It was easy. I know plenty of other people that were unable to. So,
What kind did you eat?
great question. Who asked that? Great question. I started with mint chocolate chip and I finished with chocolate because they don't sell ice cream in half gallons anymore. They sell them in whatever size that is. And so I started with that one and finished it off with a little portion of chocolate. Good combo. So this is the actual monument at the halfway point of the trail too. So let's see. This here is crossing the Delaware, crossing into New Jersey. These are some other folks that I hiked off and on with, especially through the New Jersey, New York section, 0G and Low Main. But the rocks do not stop when you leave Pennsylvania. They hang on for half of New Jersey. Is what we would soon find. New Jersey had a lot of lower lying places. We went through kind of some swampy territory. They've got this really cool section that's got this, like, a lot of nice boardwalks that trail volunteers have built. Kind of gets to look a little bit different once you start hitting New Jersey territory. You know, a lot of the trail in the south has been these big rolling Blue Ridge type mountains, and New Jersey starts to just feel a little bit different when you get here. Let's see. We get to New York. I did take a side trip to New York City with 0G, just to kind of take a little break from trail and go check out New York City. I had not been there in a while. Kind of fun. They dropped us off, a bus that picked us up right off trail, dropped us off at the bus stop by Times Square. And we must have just been repugnant, smelly hikers. We could tell people around us were trying to keep their distance. So it was kind of fun. There's a zoo that the trail passes directly through on trail near, I think it's Big Bear State Park. These are the bears at that zoo. Kind of cool though. Yeah.
Did you eat at any good restaurants in downtown New York?
When I went,
Deli?
well, delis are ubiquitous along the whole of the Appalachian Trail through New York. So we were used to eating at delis. People actually call it deli blazing because you can eat at so many of them along the way. When I went though, I specifically tried to find a really good place to go eat high-class ramen noodles because I had been eating so many trash ramen noodles that I wanted to go and get something real good, which I did manage. So sought it out, got it. Let's see. Connecticut is 51 miles, another kind of blink and you miss it sort of state. This was the first covered bridge I saw, so, you know, kind of like welcome to New England. Not too hideously much to Connecticut, although it was much harder than I thought it would be being such a short state. There's a brutal up and down when you get there, just to where you could easily road walk around it, but the trail decided to go up the mountain and back down, where it takes like a 13 miles to do it, where you could have done it in one. But the Appalachian Trail is famous for doing that exact sort of thing, by the way. They will find the hardest way. That's what gives it so much elevation change. Massachusetts, another not, you know, you start to hit these little states pretty frequently once you get up here. 91 miles of trail there. Has Mount Greylock, that's the monument that's here, that's the high point of Massachusetts. This is where I learned that a great town strategy would be to buy a gallon of milk and drink it while you were in town.
Oh.
Because you can't pack out milk, but you can drink it in town.
Wow.
It's very calorie dense and has a lot of protein. So Massachusetts was a real neat place. I was passing through there. Well, I guess it must have been right around Labor Day. I wish I would have gotten pictures, but I looked back on my phone and didn't have any. But right on Labor Day weekend, I was at a cabin kind of shelter called Goose Pond Shelter, where there's like an actual caretaker at it. They cook you a breakfast, for free. You can stay there on a more or less comfortable bunk. But there were a lot of people visiting there for Labor Day weekend that were just there for the day hikers. I met some people there that ended up giving me some trail magic, hosting me at their home up in New Hampshire when I hiked through New Hampshire. So very cool. Actually hiked from Goose Pond Cabin all the way down the mountain to I-94, where we met a pizza delivery guy so that we could hike 5 pizzas back up the mountain for everybody at the cabin. So,
Wow.
yeah, some epic pizza delivery was had that day. Vermont, 150 miles of the trail in Vermont. A lot of it runs with the Long Trail, which is a trail that runs all of Vermont north to south. So we encountered a lot of hikers that were doing that trail while we were on this part of the trail. It is affectionately named Vermud because it's famous for its mud. I mean, the trail oftentimes looks like this, and the kind of mud you'll step into and sink a foot in. You're trying to rock hop the best you can in order to maintain any sort of momentum to your day, but it's quite a quagmire. You start to hit these downhill ski resorts when you get to Vermont. This picture here is actually one of the little buildings on top of one of the ski hills. They would use this for staff as a warming hut, but in the summer they let thru hikers just stay there, which was super nice. This is also where the trail starts to get a bit more rugged. The mountains become a little bit taller. You start to hit your mountains that are 4,000 foot plus when you get to Vermont. This is a picture of just a ladder that was on the trail. I mean, that was your way up, which was the first of many kinds of those things on the trail. And this was just a cool, one of the last kind of hostels that I was able to find in Vermont. Places to stay, like hostels, become fewer and farther between once you get up north. Kind of all over the place in the south, but this was a particularly nice one in Vermont. This was actually at that same place where that ski hut was, Bromley Mountain Ski Resort. So they had a cool watchtower on the very top. Snagged a nice sunset there. New Hampshire is where the trail gets really hard, really fast. New Hampshire is home to the White Mountains. Almost all the trail runs through the White Mountain National Forest in New Hampshire, and it is constant up and downs. It is brutal, almost immediately after passing into the state. On a scale of 1 to 10 as far as hardest parts of the trail, I'd say New Hampshire's up there at 10. This is a picture of my bruised foot from having trod on it so many downhills. I took 2 days off at, I forget the name of the town, but I took 2 days off at a hotel just to let my feet heal after doing the bulk of the whites.
Wow.
Yep.
Did you lose any toenails?
I lost no toenails.
Oh, good
No,
job.
yeah, thank you.
Did you use trekking poles at all?
I did use trekking poles the whole length of the trail, which help. They help on the downhills, give a little bit of support, but boy, it's brutal. Yeah. New Hampshire's pretty cool though. I mean, the views that you get in New Hampshire are so much more open and expansive. You actually get to these mountains that go and have alpine zones where you're above tree line for a lot of the hikes. Franconia Ridge is a beautiful section through the Whites. The Presidential Traverse, which includes Mount Washington, which is the highest peak in the east, on the east coast. Just a lot of very very neat, beautiful sections in New Hampshire. You know, difficult but rewarding. There are these things called huts run by the Appalachian Mountain Club through a much of the Weiss. These are like, people pay a lot of money to stay in these huts. I think like $200 per bunk. This is one of them I'm sitting at here. They serve breakfast to these folks that pay to stay there. But if you get there early enough and you're a thru hiker, you can ask for a work for stay, in which like they will ask you, okay, do you want to work for stay? Wash these pots and pans that have not been washed in 10,000 years, and you can stay here for free tonight and eat all the leftover food on top of it. So very, very good if you can get it kind of work. But they were kind of a unique aspect to New Hampshire and the White Mountains, were these huts. Just as well as all of the people that were hiking in this area. This is a picture I took on top of Mount Lincoln. They were having a flags on the 48 celebration. I think that's what it is. There are 48 peaks in New Hampshire that are above 4,000 feet. And on this particular day, they rose a flag on every 4,000 footer. And so I would go over all of these mountains on that day to all of these crowds of people, you know, around these flags. It's kind of cool. Like I said, New Hampshire hiking gets difficult. This is a pretty commonplace thing where you'll start to see rebar just drilled into the side of the mountain that you need to climb up these portions to get to your next place. This is somebody I hiked with for a bit up in New Hampshire, half pint. You know, kind of half pint for scale, but like this is the trail that we're hiking on. Just brutal crags of rock. So kind of pick your own way through it. So that's kind of the theme. This is Mount Washington. I did the whole of the Presidential Traverse, which is about 20 miles in one day, which was kind of brutally crazy because it's not easy. But it was a great day to do it. There was weather coming the next day, and like, I'm going to do it in the good rather than the bad. Mount Washington is actually a peak that you can drive to the top of. There's also a train that runs up to the top of Mount Washington. One of the traditions amongst thru hikers is to moon this train. I happened to pass by it when there was no train coming. I don't know if I would have, but that's one of the traditions.
So is this a NOAA site? National,
I don't know. I would guess probably.
don't they get some of the coldest temperatures and the most snow?
They get.
East.
They have the highest recorded wind speed
Winds.
on planet Earth at Mount Washington.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's up there and it gets some wicked weather.
Which direction is the wind blowing at that point?
I would
Southwest and northeast?
probably there, I would say. But yeah, there are warning signs all over when you're hiking up to Mount Washington. You know, on such a nice day like today, you know, it didn't matter as much, but they make you plenty aware that it's dangerous to hike up here in the bad times, you know, when the weather's foul. But it's beautiful in the best way. This is another one of those one of the huts run by the AMC. I just passed by that one, got some coffee. But nice places.
Is that the trail that we're seeing from?
Yeah, actually, this is the Appalachian Trail. It goes down to the hut, and then it courses its way up here, and I think it takes I kind of lose it here, but I think it juts up this little gap there on its way up to Washington. So, yeah, cool expansive views. And then you get to Maine. Maine is the last of the states on the trail. 282 miles, though. A lot of miles still left when you get to Maine. You get there and you're like, oh, it's the last one. I'm almost there. No, you are not. There's still a lot left to go. Maine is by far the most remote and wild part of the trail. And there are so few people there, especially in comparison to where you were just coming from. You know, the Whites, people go there all the time. There's a lot of day hikers, section hikers. Far less in Maine. And a lot of water crossings in Maine too. You know, a lot of the trail before Maine had bridges that would coddle you across rivers. Maine just expects you most of the time to walk through them. There was a nice plank of wood here, but that's kind of an exception. I thought this privy was kind of fun. And you can't tell, but that's a cribbage board between the two. Yeah, I couldn't convince anybody to play it. This is the Kennebec River. It's actually a river that the ATC strongly encourages you not to ford. They actually run a ferry across this river as a service to hikers. I got here too late to be able to leverage the ATC run ferry, and so we got to use Cheryl. When you got to the river, across the way, there's a lady named Cheryl. She's maybe this high and maybe 100 years old. But you just yell across the river, "Cheryl!" And she would come out of her house, paddle across, and ferry hikers across for a small fee, on the fringe season. So, good, sweet old lady. But I actually had I had a surprise visit from some relatives while I was in Maine. They happened to be vacationing there and tried to coordinate and meet me where they knew they could. So it was cool to see some family while I was there. Let's see what else we got. Maine is home to the Mahoosic Notch, which is said to be the hardest single mile of hiking on the entire trail. It's basically just clambering over, through, and around these big rocks. I just go through there. You got to squeeze through this little thing. Backpack for scale, that's my backpack. So, yeah, very interesting section of trail, the Mahoosic Notch. That 1 mile might take you an entire hour to get through. So, I thought it was kind of fun, like a wilderness jungle gym.
How long was what you had to crawl through?
Not too far, not that little section. I mean, you can see where it comes out on the other side there, but it's, I don't know, maybe 10 feet or so.
Oh,
So,
okay.
but you oftentimes, in this little section, have to crawl through and pull your backpack after you.
Oh, geez.
You couldn't wear it through.
Yeah.
So there's enough white blazes, because I would question, say, that can't be part of the trail.
Yeah, there are, it does get a little dicey, because sometimes you look around and it's not totally clear. You don't see a white blaze that points you very specifically, go through this.
Right.
Because, it would seem ridiculous, right?
Right.
So part of this section in particular is kind of figuring it out for yourself. But there's actually 2 cliff faces on either side of this, so you kind of only have one general direction you can go. So, let's see, this is more rebar. I just found it ridiculous every time I hit structures like this. This is the white blaze, and you're supposed to go up this vertical rock face. So, kind of cool, but made for some slow hiking on some days. I also got hit by a pretty big windstorm while I was in Maine one of these days, trees blowing down all over the place.
Whoa.
It was a little spooky. And at that point, you're just kind of in the middle of nowhere, so it's well, where do you go? I mean, you're just as safe walking as you are standing in one place, so keep walking through it. I was in Maine in the fall, which had the benefit of not very many bugs, and it was absolutely beautiful. This is one of my favorite pictures I took while I was in Maine in the autumn. Just occasionally you'd come up where you got these nice views of where you had been hiking through. In this particular photo, I know I came around this mountain, down this lake, around there, and eventually wormed my way up here. But it's just very cool to have been there in the fall. At this point, not many hikers are still here in Maine. I was kind of lagging behind the curve a little bit, but I did not mind because I got treated to views like such. Maine was pretty wet for a lot of it too. This is just an example of how the trail could sometimes look, full of water. But again, you just kind of plod on through. You only got one way you're going. All right, so as I said, I was late in the game. I was one of the last folks out there. And actually, when I got to Mount Katahdin, that's Mount Katahdin here in this picture, they had closed the trail the day before, earlier by a couple weeks than they normally would have. They say finish the trail by October 15th, and usually that's plenty fine and you even have extra time. But they got hit by a freak early snowstorm that they ended up closing the mountain earlier than they have in decades. Huge bummer, because I got to where we would start doing the final 5 miles of the trail and was told, after having come out of what they call the 100-mile wilderness, which is a very unpopulated part of the trail, 100 miles of unsupported hiking, come out and I was met with one of the dads of the friend I was hiking with, and he said, "Oh, don't you know the mountain's closed?" And just hits you like a ton of bricks. You're like, what? So I actually ended up staying in a nearby town in Maine for a few days, waiting to see whether or not they would reopen the mountain for, even a day would be enough. I had 5 miles left to go, 5.2. And as it turned out, they did not reopen the mountain for fall hiking. So, yeah. After you walk almost 2,200 miles to be told you can't do this 5, the last 5, it's pretty disheartening. However, gotta be a however, undeterred by that, some friends and I immediately began making plans to finish the trail once they reopened it in the winter. The reason they closed the trail in the fall and on the fringe seasons is because when it snows a little bit, there's a tendency for people to wander off trail and especially pose a risk to the fragile alpine plants that live up there. They're endangered, not found very many places, and so they want to protect them. Totally get it. But they do reopen the trail when there's so much snow and ice that it doesn't matter who's walking on it. So, me plus what was initially like 10 other people started researching like, well, what does it take to do a winter hike? Let's gear ourselves up to do that. So I retooled my whole gear setup, got myself some snowshoes, crampons, an ice axe. I switched over to a heftier backpack, swapped out my sleeping bag, my sleeping pad, just retooled everything to go and tackle Katahdin in the winter. That 5 miles left that I had to do became what amounts to a 10-mile hike to the base of the mountain, a 10-mile round trip, that 5 miles up and 5 miles back down, and then 5 miles back out. We planned this with a bunch of contingency days in case the weather was foul. We were certainly not going to go up Katahdin in bad weather in the winter. So we planned up to a week to do this. We were fully prepared to sit at camp and wait for the weather to get better for 3 days if it took that. We initially consulted a guide, but decided against it, mostly in part because of sticker shock. Costs a lot to have a guide you on something like this, but also in part because we felt that we had enough education amongst us to get through it safely, and not make poor decisions. So, I went back. So I left the trail in mid-October, came back to Hayward, got back to my usual thing, but having the mind to go back in mid-December, which, here we are, back in Baxter State Park on December 14th, facing down Mount Katahdin. An entirely different trail, covered in snow, but overall we were pretty darn ready for it. The coldest it got while I was back doing this last leg of the trip was down to about 0 on our first night. Very frustrating camping at 0 degrees if you've never done it. Water was the biggest thing. Water would freeze immediately when we would take it out of the stream to go and cook dinner. Whole different game, hiking and camping in the wintertime. But we were willing to take it in order to get these last 5 miles of trail. This is just kind of a neat picture of one of the rivers going up in Baxter State Park. This is what the trail looked like for a lot of the way of this last hike. They actually called us to warn us, Baxter State Park did. They called our group leader up, the person that signed our permit, and said, hey, you might want to reconsider doing this hike. It just rained here, which it did. It rained inches of rain the a couple days before we left, and it all froze. Everything was ice. And so this is just glare ice up the trail, and we had, about 5-ish miles of it. But we went anyway. We used traction control, crampons and little studded inserts for our shoes. So we were prepared for it. It made it difficult, but that's kind of what we had to contend with. This is a picture going up the spine of Mount Katahdin. Got actually much better once we broke tree line. I don't have any pictures of it, but just before tree line, there was one section of hiking in the snow that I think was the hardest hiking of the entire trail. Maybe half a mile of trying to hike with a pack through snow that was, chest deep. So it would occasionally hold you, and I should say I also got the privilege of being the first in our group to go through this great trail. Occasionally you could walk on top of it, but every third step or so, you'd break through. So difficult. I thought to myself, if it keeps on being like this for any significant length of time further, we are not making it to the top. But luckily, it did not last. So, breaking tree line, things got better. Not totally better. This is more ice. I just thought it was so ridiculous I had to document it so people would know. It was a bit treacherous up here at the top. Kind of skating from place to place.
Oh my word.
It does flatten out once you get on to near the top of Katahdin, what they call the tablelands. This is actually, the trail comes up that ridge, comes here, walks along this mostly flat but very icy section, up this little ridge, and actually it is not very far at all from this picture to where you get to the sign, which is what every thru hiker dreams of when they start the trail, is getting to the sign. So finally we got there. This is December 15th on the summit of Mount Katahdin, and there's just such a sigh of relief in having gotten here, a personal sense of accomplishment. This is Hotfoot having his moment with the sign. And on such a beautiful day too. Question?
How come that guy's name's Alan?
Alan is Hotfoot's friend from back home. He is not a thru hiker. Van Gogh, Hotfoot, and I were, but Alan was along for the ride. Real nice guy, but yeah, no trail name, just Alan. We actually could not have asked for a better weather window to do this little hike that we did up to the summit of Katahdin. The next day it rained, and more rain, started to snow, just gross. But this day was just like hand-picked to be the best day. We lucked out for sure. So this was it. All that was left at this point was to go back down the mountain and get on out. So, this is my solo summit picture of Katahdin. I'm very proud of what this picture means for me and what I was able to accomplish on the overall, the entire journey. I've got this hanging up on the wall at my house just to, remind me of, that I did this whole thing. It was something very special. So.
Seems like there would be a bigger sign.
I know, right?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Highway
Well,
sign.
Yeah. We take what we can get.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it was a pretty neat thing to see.
Yeah.
Tried to sum up some lessons learned here, as in the months after my hike, really thinking back on it, what did the whole experience do for me? What did I come away with? And really, a big part of it was, at a time that I personally lacked some self-confidence in my, what I could do, what I could complete and make of myself. Starting and finishing the AT was, meant a lot to me because it reproved to myself that I could do these very hard things, that I could see it through successfully. It rekindled some faith in humanity, like I said before, that on the whole, people are typically good, and I saw that come through all the time on the Appalachian Trail. left me with, that renewed sense of what people could do and be. You come back with a very profound appreciation for little things. I distinctly remember I was back home and just even listening to music, cooking eggs in the kitchen. I'm like, this is awesome. These little things that you take for granted, like running water and food whenever you want it, and an easy day, tasty food, whatever it may be.
Happy feet.
Happy feet. The company of your family and friends. It does a lot. Having deprived yourself of it for so long teaches you the importance of all those things. Some big takeaways that I got from having done the hike, I find it is very important to live your life how you want to live it out, and not how everybody else thinks you should. I know I met plenty of people that question, like, how the heck, why would you put your life on hold to go and do something like this? What will it do to your future, your career, and ultimately having done it and come through the other side of it successfully, or not even, but I did. Who cares? This is what I wanted to do, and I find it immensely valuable that I, took the time to go and do this thing that I wanted to do for so long. And that would be a big piece of advice that I would have to anybody that's sitting on something that they want to do. I thought for a long time that the Appalachian Trail would be something that because I learned about it back in college. I thought, I'll do that when I retire. But the more I thought of it, the more I thought, who knows if that day ever even comes. I could be struck down by lightning tomorrow, and that day may never come. I could lose interest when I'm older. I could not be able to do it. I met a lot of people that started the trail down south, having just retired, and just couldn't do the trail. This lifelong dream that they had, they were just unable to complete it. And so, whether it is the Appalachian Trail or some other personal dream, goal, or desire that you've got, I think it's very important to, maybe go for it. Question?
So what sparked your initial interest in hiking the Appalachian Trail? Was there something specific, or?
I think nothing's hugely specific. I first learned about the Appalachian Trail in college. We would go hiking occasionally in Devil's Lake State Park, down near Madison at Baraboo. And, from hiking around there, I learned that there were these long trails, like the Ice Age Trail or the North Country Trail that, are right nearby us. And I think from there, I just kind of got an interest in someday doing a long trail. And for me, the Appalachian Trail seemed like the most attractive initially, because I've never done a long trail, and logistically, it seemed like the easiest to do. Most people, it's got the most people that try to do it. It's the very supported trail, very well established. And so I thought, I'll take a crack at this backpacking thing. And so I think that's just, the AT is where I landed with it, and I'm glad I did. But.
Any interest in doing another trail, like Pacific Crest? Or?
Yeah, I do have interest in doing further trails, because, in my what comes next, I would love to complete, all three of these trails, the American Triple Crown hiking trails, the Continental Divide and the Pacific Crest Trail. Right now, I am taking this whole year off and working hard to save up for the next trail. I think that depending on what this coming winter brings, I'm in 2026 going to strike out for one of these other two. So that to me is what I got coming next, at least as far as hiking goes. So.
Would you go back to anywhere along the AT, like to enjoy a section? And what section,
Yeah, I think I would. I would love to go back to Katahdin and do it in the summer. I've thought of that a couple times. Most people's experience with Mount Katahdin was not what I had.
Right. Yeah.
So I'd love to go and see what it has to offer for a more relaxed hike.
Right.
So definitely that. I love the White Mountains in New Hampshire. Would certainly go back and do some more hiking and exploring there. And I think if I had to pick another section, I'd probably go back to maybe the Virginia Triple Crown section, around Roanoke there. Beautiful hiking. So yeah, would go back.
That's good to hear that you're not like, I don't want to walk 1 foot on the trail.
Yeah, no, I haven't sworn off the AT, so by no stretch.
What was it like hiking the 100-mile wilderness in Maine?
Yeah, good question. I know I kind of glossed over a bit of stuff there in Maine, but
There's a sign at the beginning, I saw the sign where it says that you need to carry at least 10 days of food and
yeah.
no one's going to be around to help you. And
Yep, so there's a section in Maine of 100 miles that's basically unsupported. It runs from Monson, Maine, up to Aball Bridge, which is right near the entrance to Baxter State Park. There's one major, not even major, there's one minor road crossing there where you might be able to get some support if you call it in. But yeah, it's unsupported, so that you need to make sure you have enough food to get through all the 100 miles. Funny story, I resupplied in Monson, got all my food for the 100-mile wilderness stretch, left, did my first day of hiking, it was like 20 miles, maybe 21 or so, realized that I forgot half of my food supply.
whoa!
Yeah. No, if I had to pick one single stupidest mistake I did as a hiker on trail, it was that. I ended up needing to lean on some friends that I had that I was hiking with that were able to give me some of their excess food, and a little bit of trail magic at that one road crossing, because there was somebody there waiting to resupply somebody with some stuff. But it was a little bit more rough for me going through the 100 miles because I forgot half my food. For most people though, the 100-mile wilderness, by that point, if you're a no-bow hiker, you're pretty accustomed to being able to breeze through 100 miles pretty quickly. The 100-mile is not the most rigorous as far as terrain goes. It's pretty easy grade, especially in the second half. And so you can really realistically get through it in about 4 days if you want, 25-mile chunks. You got great trail legs, you're up in northern Maine, you're almost done with your hike. So, and I think the 100-mile did take 4, maybe 5 days for me. Got hit by a little bit of weather, but you're kind of prepared for it at that point. Yeah.
So, about what was your typical length of day as far as like what time did you get going, how long did you go?
Yeah, good question. I would typically, I didn't wake up super early or anything. I would typically get up around 7 o'clock or so, get hiking. I'd take a few breaks throughout the day. One kind of mid-morning, one for lunch that was longer, one in the mid-afternoon, and then settle down by, I like to get camp set up before sundown all the time. So, depending on the time of year, because we hiked all through the summer, days were long, I'd finish my day sometimes 6 o'clock and have tons of daylight left. Like I said, I was also kind of a faster hiker than most of the people I was hiking with, and so I would finish my day early and wait hours for them to catch up and get to camp, which I liked. I could easily hike 4 miles per hour all day long, and I think a lot of other people's tended to be kind of along like 2.5, 3 miles per hour. So I gained some ground and have my relax time at the end of the day. That's kind of how I like to do it. So, but yeah, I liked to get to camp before the sun was down, have some chill time. Changed a bit once I was up north, because you're, into October, the days were just so much shorter that, my sundown preference, to be at camp before the sunset turned into, be setting up camp usually right after sunset, just for the sake of being able to get mileage in for the day because it was so condensed at that point. But yeah, you kind of take it as your new full-time job, hiking. What do you do all day? You walk, 8 hours or so. you know, whatever the day brings. But that'd be the typical structure.
How do the through hikers view, you know, I've read some stories about people that do the quick as they can.
Yeah, like
You know, like in 40 days or whatever.
yeah, yep. They call it FKT is the short for fastest known time,
Right.
and there are different ways that people approach FKTs.
Do the
Supported,
people that do
unsupported.
the hiking in normal time have any thoughts on that? Do they see them as really glorified, or they say that's kind of strange?
It's a mixed bag. You know, there are certainly people that will view an FKT as, you know, like missing the point of the hike. You know, a lot of people that hike the trail are doing it to get, you know, to take a step back from hustle bustle and get grounded with nature, and they view a fastest known time attempt as missing that grounded aspect of trail life and trail culture. So there's a lot of people that frown upon it, but I think there are just as many people that, you know, they would say hike your own hike. You know, that's how they wanted to do it. I've got the way I want to do it. Good on them. You know, I find myself in that camp. You know, do it however it is you wish. Frankly, I find it impressive. You know,
Are they supported kind of every day? So to speak?
it depends, because, you know, there are records that are set for the fastest supported known time and the fastest unsupported. This year, I forget her name, but there was a woman that set the new FKT.
Tara Dower.
Tara Dower, yeah. So she must have passed me at some point. I would never have known it. But yeah, she completed the trail in some 40 whatever days, which is incredible. I mean, just such a feat of athleticism. Like, that's amazing.
She was running.
Yeah, I mean, at that point, you're not hiking, you're running. You're treating the trail as a trail run. And I saw plenty of people, you know, out there trail running. And I met one guy that blazed past me down in Georgia. He was training to do what he was going to get the fastest known yo-yo time, which is going from, you know, one point to another point and back. He was going to do the fastest known Georgia yo-yo time. Which is like, okay, that's oddly specific. Because he trail ran past me in Georgia up this hill, and I thought, where are you going? And that's what he told me. And so, like, well, if that's what you want to do, that's great. Good on you. Yeah?
Tara would get up at 3:30, run for 17 hours with short dirt naps or food naps, and that's what she did it in 40 days.
Yeah, and I believe that. I mean, have basically no
50
downtime.
miler days,
Yeah.
40 days in a row.
Yeah, and my longest day on trail was that, you know, 54 miles, and I was wrecked the next day, and I did not run it. So, but yeah, I mean, people do it in all sorts of different ways. That's certainly one way to do it.
Did
Yeah.
you meet anyone else from Wisconsin? And then also, what was the oldest, like, age person hiker that you met?
Yeah, I met one other person from Wisconsin. He was a section hiker. I met him right around in the New Jersey area, I seem to recall. Didn't have a trail name. I don't recall what his name was, but he was the only other person I really met from Wisconsin. Yeah, the Appalachian Trail is really well represented by all the states that it runs through as far as peopleage goes. You know, a lot of people from the East Coast. Really, not a ton of Midwesterners. Yeah, only a small handful of us. As far as age goes, I met plenty of people that were, I mean, definitely up there in age. Like I said, I met a lot of people that retired and endeavored to do the trail as their retirement thing. One lady I met, she had to be, I mean, she had to be 70 doing the trail. You know, she was having a little bit of a rough go of it in the Virginia area. She actually like fell and sprained something while we were right near McAfee Knob, where I had that nice picture. And they thought she was gonna for sure be like taken off, get off trail. But like she came back and powered through. I saw her later on, like up in, well, I guess up in Pennsylvania somewhere. I was surprised to have seen her again. But wow, good on you. So yeah, all sorts of people out there.
Was Cheryl's boat a rowboat or did it have a motor?
It was a rowboat. Actually, no, it was a kayak.
Oh,
Yeah.
Oh,
jeez.
Yep. She kayaked us across that thing, and actually, me and Van Gogh went across with her at the same time. Water level dangerously close to coming up above the side of the boat. I was shocked when she suggested, let's take both of you across. I'm like, okay, you're the expert here, Cheryl. But
No
yeah.
life jackets. Did you have life jackets?
No, we did not have life jackets. The reason that the ATC encourages people to use the ferry and not ford the river is because there's a dam upstream, and they oftentimes change the level of the Kennebec to the degree like it could rise a foot,
Yeah, the current.
couple feet, 3 feet,
Current.
very fast. So, yeah, the Kennebec, I mean, it's claimed some people. So that's why they tell you, do not cross it.
And who would have stopped you from doing the Kennedyne on the last 5 miles just because you knew it was closed? But did they actually have people standing there?
Great question.
Because, you know.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
we hung around in town for days after waiting to see if they would reopen the mountain, and we through hikers that were left behind were plotting and scheming and wondering like, who's gonna stop us? Let's just do the mountain. We chose not to for the sake of, because we had a plan. We named it Operation Moon Cat. We were going to do it by night because we had the full moon.
No one would have known.
Well, we later learned that they do have a lot of trail cams there, and they will, if they can identify you,
Okay.
they will fine you. They will try to figure out who you are. So, yeah. There's nobody that's going to physically stop you, but they'll try to get you after the fact. So.
all right. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.